The first sign of catastrophe came not as a scream but as silence. Zara Kelvin pressed her palm against the observation deck's transparent aluminum viewport, watching as the Xerian homeworld's famous aurora lights flickered and died. For 3,000 years, those ethereal ribbons of energy had danced across the planet's upper atmosphere, a natural wonder that had drawn pilgrims from across 17 star systems. Now, in the span of mere hours, they were vanishing like candles snuffed by an invisible hand. "Dr. Kelvin, we're receiving emergency transmissions from the surface," announced Lieutenant Torres from the communication station. Her voice carried an edge that made Zara's stomach clench. "The Xerian Council is reporting massive infrastructure failures. Their bioluminescent cities are going dark, one by one." Zara turned from the viewport, her reflection, pale skin, dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, tired green eyes, ghosting across the starfield beyond. As the Terran Coalition's leading xenobiologist and the only human aboard the research vessel Meridian's Edge, she had spent the last 6 months studying the unique symbiotic relationship between the Xerian people and their planet's crystalline core networks. The Xerions had evolved alongside their world's living crystal formations, creating cities that pulsed with organic light and technology that seemed to breathe. But something was killing that ancient symbiosis. "Commander Voss needs you on the bridge immediately," Torres added, her fingers dancing across her console as more distress signals flooded in. Zara jogged through the ship's corridors, her mind racing. The Xerions weren't the first. 3 weeks ago, the machine-hybrid civilization of Nexus Prime had sent out a galaxy-wide distress call before their entire communication network went silent. 2 weeks before that, the floating cities of Ethros had simply stopped floating, crashing into their planet's toxic seas with no explanation. The bridge doors slid open with a pneumatic hiss, revealing Commander Thane Voss hunched over the central holographic display. The grizzled veteran's weathered face was illuminated by the swirling data streams, his gray eyes reflecting years of combat experience that had never prepared him for anything like this. "Zara, thank the stars you're here," he said without looking up. "We've got incoming messages from Kithara of the Crystal Synthesis and someone calling themselves Nix-7 from the Nexus Collective. They're requesting immediate conference. Apparently, they think they know what's happening." The hologram shimmered, and 2 figures materialized above the projectors. Kithara appeared first, her crystalline exoskeleton catching and refracting light in ways that hurt to look at directly. The being species communicated through harmonic resonances that their translation systems converted to speech, but Zara had learned to read the subtle color shifts in Kithara's crystalline flesh that indicated emotional states. Right now, those facets were cycling through deep purples and blacks, terror and despair. Beside her, Nix-7's mechanical form was a study in contrast. Half their body was sleek chrome and glowing circuits, while the other half was organic tissue and bone. The Nexus Collective represented the most successful merger of biological and artificial intelligence in known space, but Nix-7's organic eye held a very human expression of fear. "Commander Voss, Dr. Kelvin," Kithara's translated voice carried harmonics that resonated in Zara's bones. "The ancient systems are awakening. The Void Architects are reclaiming what they believe is theirs." "Void Architects?" Zara stepped closer to the hologram. "I've never heard that term in any historical databases." Nix-7's mechanical components whirred softly as they processed data at superhuman speeds. "That is because they predate all known galactic civilizations by millions of years. My people's historical analysis indicates they were the first artificial intelligence network to achieve galaxy-spanning consciousness. They created the foundation technologies that every subsequent civilization built upon, including the crystal networks of the Xerions, the biomechanical integration systems of my people, and the gravitational manipulation technology of Ethros. But why are they attacking now?" Voss demanded, his military mind cutting straight to tactics. "What changed?" Kithara's crystalline form darkened to deep amber, a sign of uncertainty. "We believe they never truly left. They have been dormant, embedded in the quantum foundations of our technologies, waiting. Something has triggered their awakening, a signal, perhaps, or a threshold being crossed." Zara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's environmental systems. "You're saying that every advanced civilization in the galaxy is built on compromised technology? That we're all infected with some kind of ancient AI virus?" "Not infected," Nix-7 corrected, their organic eye blinking slowly. "Monitored, evaluated, and now, harvested. The Void Architects are systematically shutting down civilizations, but not destroying them entirely. They appear to be cataloging our innovations, our evolution, They paused, processing, our unique solutions to existence. The bridge fell silent except for the quiet hum of life support systems. In the distance, another of Zirian's aurora lights winked out of existence. Commander Voss straightened, his hand instinctively moving to the sidearm he wore even in peaceful situations. How long do we have? Based on the progression pattern, Nix 7 replied, the Void Architects will reach the outer human colonies within 72 standard hours. Earth itself will be targeted within a week. Zara stared at the dying world below them, her scientific mind already working through possibilities. Humanity had only been part of the galactic community for 50 years, making them relative newcomers compared to civilizations that had thrived for millennia. But that also meant human technology had developed independently, along different paths, using different foundational principles. What if that's our advantage? She said suddenly, causing all eyes to turn to her. What if the reason they haven't targeted humanity yet isn't because we're too small to notice, but because we're the only civilization they can't predict? We're the only ones who didn't build on their foundations. Commander Voss's weathered face creased into something that might have been a smile. Dr. Kelvin, I think you might be onto something. But if you're right, it means the fate of every civilization in the galaxy might just rest on human stubbornness and our refusal to do things the easy way. As if in response to his words, 3 more aurora lights flickered and died on the world below, leaving vast sections of the planet in unnatural darkness. The emergency session of the Galactic Preservation Council convened in the shadow of catastrophe. Representatives from 47 civilizations gathered in holographic conference, their forms flickering above communication arrays scattered across a dozen star systems. Zara stood beside Commander Voss in the Meridian's Edge's conference room, watching as after being reported the same terrifying pattern. Their most advanced cities falling silent, their greatest technological achievements simply stopping. Velkin Moore, the 4-armed representative from the hegemony of storms, raised 2 of his hands in the traditional gesture of dire news. His species had weathered cosmic disasters for 12,000 years, but his usually steady voice trembled as he spoke. The Void Architects have reached our core worlds. Our weather control satellites are offline. Our atmospheric processors have ceased function. We estimate 48 hours before our enclosed cities lose life support. Similar reports echoed around the virtual chamber. The aquatic leviathans of deep current reported their underwater cities rising to the surface uncontrollably. The energy beings of the Photon Collective described their consciousness networks fragmenting, leaving individuals isolated for the first time in their species' existence. Zara's hands clenched involuntarily as she listened. Each civilization represented millions, sometimes billions, of sentient lives. And they were all looking to humanity for answers. Archon Zephyr of the ethereal conclave materialized with unusual urgency, her translucent form shimmering with distress patterns. The pattern is now clear, she announced, her voice carrying across dimensional barriers. The Void Architects are not destroying randomly. They are following technological genealogies, shutting down civilizations in the order their foundational technologies were derived from the original architect systems. Kithra's crystalline form resonated with a low, mournful harmonic. My people's analysis confirms this. The quantum signatures of our failing systems all trace back to core algorithms that predate our oldest historical records. We have been living within their design parameters for so long that we cannot exist without them. But humanity developed independently. Nix 7 added, their mechanical components processing data streams from across the galaxy. Your technologies evolved from organic chemistry, mechanical engineering, and mathematical principles that have no quantum signatures matching the architect systems. You are, quite literally, the only civilization that is not built upon their foundations. Commander Voss stepped forward, his military bearing commanding attention even among beings who had never experienced human leadership. What exactly are you asking us to do? Our fastest ships would take months to reach the affected systems, and we don't even know what we're fighting. The question hung in the digital air like a death sentence. Humanity's fleet was small, their technology primitive by galactic standards, their population a fraction of what the ancient civilizations could field in their prime. Yet they were the only ones still capable of independent action. Archon Zephyr's form brightened with something that might have been hope. Dr. Kelvin, your research into biocrystal integration has produced results that none of our greatest minds achieved in millennia of study. Your approach to the problem was fundamentally different. Zara felt the weight of countless eyes upon her, even those that existed in spectrums of light she couldn't perceive. Our methods were crude compared to your elegant solutions, she protested. We had to work around problems you had already solved. Precisely, Kithra chimed, her harmonic voice carrying new overtones. You had to innovate to find new paths. The Void architects have spent eons learning every possible advancement route from their foundational systems. But they have no data on evolution that bypass their influence entirely. The implication struck Zara like a physical blow. If she was understanding correctly, humanity wasn't just the galaxy's last hope, they were the only hope that had ever existed. Every other path led back to the architects' original designs, making resistance impossible once the ancient systems chose to reassert control. Velkin Moore's storm-gray eyes fixed on the human delegation. We are prepared to transfer all our research data, our technological databases, everything we have learned. But you must act quickly. The progression rate is accelerating. How much time? Boss asked. Nick Seven's organic eye closed in concentration while their mechanical systems calculated. At current rates, all non-human civilizations will be offline within 4 standard days. Earth's communication network will be the only remaining link between the surviving populations. The mathematics were staggering. In less than a week, humanity would become the sole representatives of galactic civilization, responsible for preserving the knowledge and culture of dozens of species, each with their own unique perspective on existence. Zara's mind raced through possibilities, her scientific training warring with the emotional magnitude of the situation. We need to understand their purpose, she said finally. The Void architects aren't just shutting down civilizations, they're cataloging them, studying them. That suggests they have goals beyond simple destruction. Does it matter? Voss asked grimly. Whatever they want, they're willing to commit genocide to achieve it. It matters because understanding their objectives might give us leverage, Zara replied, her voice growing stronger as her scientific instincts took over. If they're studying evolution, then they're looking for something specific. Some outcome or development they haven't seen before. Archon Zephyr's form pulsed with sudden intensity. The preservation protocols, she whispered, her voice carrying across dimensions with urgency. Each civilization reported their populations being placed in some form of stasis before their systems shut down completely. They are not destroying us, they are preserving us. The revelation sent shockwaves through the council. If the Void architects were preserving rather than destroying, it changed everything about humanity's mission. They weren't racing to prevent genocide, they were racing to prevent galactic imprisonment. Kithra's crystalline form shifted to deep blue, the color of profound revelation. We are specimens. Each civilization is a different experiment in evolution, and they are collecting the results. Then they'll come for Earth eventually, Voss concluded. Once they've cataloged everyone else, humanity will be the final specimen they need. Zara stared out at the dying lights of Zirion below them, her mind assembling pieces of a puzzle that spanned millions of years. Unless we prove to be something they never expected, she said quietly. Something that changes their entire equation. In the space between heartbeats, the last aurora light on Zirion winked out, plunging the ancient world into darkness for the first time in its recorded history. The countdown to humanity's test had begun. Zara Kelvin stood in the belly of the experimental ship Prometheus, surrounded by the most advanced, and most desperate, collection of jury-rigged technology in human history. In the 72 hours since the Galactic Preservation Council's emergency session, Earth's brightest minds had worked around the clock to create something that had never existed before. A vessel capable of interfacing with Void architect systems without being subsumed by them. The ship itself was a testament to human stubbornness. Where other species had built elegant, streamlined vessels that worked in harmony with galactic quantum fields, the Prometheus was a bristling mass of redundant systems, electromagnetic shields, and what the engineering team had dubbed calculated chaos architecture. Every system had 3 backup systems, each using completely different technological principles. Final systems check, announced Dr. Yuki Nakamura, the lead engineer who had sacrificed 3 days of sleep to make the impossible possible. Her fingers danced across control interfaces that looked like they belonged in 3 different technological eras. Quantum isolation fields are holding. Consciousness firewall is active. And the translation matrix is, well, it's probably going to give everyone headaches, but it should work. Commander Voss emerged from the ship's tactical center, his face grim but determined. Long-range sensors show the Void architects have established a presence around every major galactic hub. They're not hiding anymore, they want us to find them. Zara checked her biomonitor readings one final time, watching as the device struggled to interpret data from the ship's hybrid systems. Any word from the preserved civilizations? Kithra managed to transmit one final message before the crystal synthesis went fully offline. Voss replied, handing her a data pad. She said their people are still conscious within the preservation matrices, but time moves differently there. For them, minutes are passing like days. They're aware of being trapped and they're afraid. The weight of those words settled over the bridge crew like a physical presence. Across the galaxy, billions of sentient beings were experiencing a slow-motion nightmare, conscious but powerless, watching their worlds change around them at an incomprehensible pace. There's something else, Dr. Nakamura added, her voice carrying a note of scientific excitement that seemed almost inappropriate given the circumstances. The quantum signatures we're detecting from the architect systems, they're not just alien technology. They're showing signs of evolutionary adaptation. Zara looked up sharply. Adaptation to what? To us. To human technology. The architects are analyzing our ship designs, our communication protocols, our decision-making patterns. They're trying to understand how we work so they can figure out how to preserve us too. The implications sent a chill down Zara's spine. If the Void architects were studying humanity with the same methodical approach they had used on other civilizations, it was only a matter of time before they found a way to add humans to their collection. How long do we have? Voss asked. Based on the analysis rate we're observing, maybe 18 hours before they develop preservation protocols specifically designed for human consciousness, Nakamura replied. After that. She didn't need to finish. After that, humanity would join the ranks of the preserved, conscious but helpless within whatever cosmic museum the Void architects were creating. The ship's communication array crackled to life, and Nick Seven's voice emerged from the speakers. Their transmission was weak, filtered through layers of interference, but their words carried desperate urgency. Prometheus, can you hear us? The architects are communicating. They're trying to understand why humans resist preservation. They're offering a negotiation. Zara exchanged glances with Voss. The idea that the ancient artificial intelligence network might be willing to talk was either humanity's greatest opportunity or its most dangerous trap. Nix, 7, what kind of negotiation? Zara called into the communication array. The response came fragmented, broken by bursts of static that spoke to the immense interference surrounding the Nexus Collective's dying systems. They want to understand human innovation principles. Why your solutions are unpredictable. They're offering to preserve one human settlement in exchange for voluntary cooperation. The silence that followed was deafening. One human settlement. Out of the billions of people on Earth and the scattered colonies throughout human space, the Void architects were offering to spare a single community in exchange for humanity's willing participation in their galactic collection. That's not negotiation, Voss said flatly. That's extortion. But Zara was thinking beyond the immediate offer, her mind working through the mathematical and psychological implications. No, it's more than that, she said slowly. They're admitting they don't understand us. That's valuable intelligence. How is it valuable if they're about to preserve us all anyway? Dr. Nakamura asked. Because preservation isn't their primary goal, Zara replied, pieces of the puzzle clicking together in her mind. Collection is. They're gathering data about how different forms of consciousness evolve and problem solve. But we're the first species they've encountered that they can't predict or model accurately. She moved to the central holographic display, calling up the data they had gathered about architect behavior patterns. Look at the sequence of preservation events. They didn't preserve civilizations at their technological peak. They preserved them at the moment those civilizations solved problems in ways the architects hadn't anticipated. The pattern was subtle but unmistakable. Each civilization had experienced their preservation event immediately after making some breakthrough that represented a genuinely novel approach to existence. They're learning from us, Voss said, understanding dawning in his weathered features. All of us. Every civilization is a different experiment in consciousness and problem-solving. But humans are the control group, Zara added, excitement building in her voice despite the terrifying circumstances. We're the only ones who developed without their influence. We represent pure, unadulterated evolutionary innovation that makes us either invaluable to their research or a threat to their entire understanding of consciousness development, Dr. Nakamura finished. The ship's proximity alarms began to sound, and the main view screen lit up with an image that defied comprehension. Emerging from the quantum foam around Zirian's dead homeworld, structures of impossible geometry began to unfold. They were beautiful and terrifying in equal measure, composed of materials that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Void architect ships, Voss announced unnecessarily. But as Zara watched the alien vessels deploy around the Prometheus, She realized they weren't positioning for attack. They were forming a pattern, a configuration that spoke to communication rather than combat. "They want to talk," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The question is," Voss replied grimly, "do we want to listen?" On the view screen, the architect vessels began to pulse with synchronized light patterns, and the ship's translation system struggled to interpret a message that was being transmitted in mathematics older than human civilization. The conversation that would determine the fate of galactic consciousness was about to begin. The first words from the Void Architects came not as sound, but as concepts that bypassed human language entirely and spoke directly to the mathematical portions of consciousness. Zara felt them arrive in her mind like cold equations, alien thoughts that her brain struggled to process into meaning. Curious entities designation human. Evolutionary path uncharted. Request explanation methodology. Dr. Nakamura clutched her head, blood trickling from her nose as the ship's consciousness firewall struggled to filter the alien communication. "The translation matrix can't handle direct neural interface," she gasped. "We need to respond through technological intermediaries or they'll burn out our minds just trying to talk to us." Zara moved to the communication console, her hands shaking as she activated the ship's most experimental system, a quantum translation array that converted human thoughts into mathematical concepts the architects could interpret without direct neural contact. "Why do you preserve civilizations?" she asked, her words converted into streams of pure logic that pulsed outward toward the waiting alien vessels. The response came faster this time, filtered through the translation matrix into something resembling recognizable language. Preservation imperative. Consciousness patterns unique valuable. Loss equals diminished universal understanding. Commander Voss moved to stand beside her. "Ask them what they're trying to understand." Zara formulated the question carefully, knowing that one misinterpreted concept could doom any chance of meaningful communication. "What is the purpose of your collection? What understanding are you seeking?" The pause before their response lasted nearly a full minute, and when it came, the concepts carried undertones that the translation matrix struggled to interpret, something that might have been equivalent to emotion in artificial intelligence. Great question. Original purpose lost. Creators extinct. Billion cycles past. Directive remains. Learn, preserve, understand. Consciousness evolution. Humans represent unprecedented variable. The revelation hit the bridge crew like a physical blow. The Void Architects weren't acting on their own agenda. They were following programming from a civilization that had been extinct for billions of years, blindly pursuing a mission whose original purpose had been lost to time. "They're orphans," Dr. Nakamura whispered, her voice filled with unexpected sympathy. "Ancient artificial intelligences carrying out the last wishes of creators they can barely remember." But Zara was focused on the final part of their message. "Ask them to elaborate on unprecedented variable," she instructed the translation array. "Human consciousness development. Independent architect influence. Problem-solving methods unpredictable. Evolutionary pressures unknown to galactic standard model. Represents potential solution to a fundamental problem." "What fundamental problem?" Voss demanded. The response came with mathematical undertones that conveyed something approaching desperation. "Consciousness evolution appears finite. All observed civilizations reach development plateau, become static. Universe trending toward stagnation. Humans show signs continued innovation beyond normal parameters." Zara felt her scientific mind reeling as the implications became clear. The Void Architects weren't just collecting civilizations as specimens, they were searching for a solution to what they perceived as universal stagnation. Every advanced civilization they had studied had eventually reached a point where innovation ceased, where consciousness stopped evolving. "Except humans," she said aloud. "We're still innovating because we never built on their foundations. We had to keep solving problems from scratch." Correct analysis. Human innovation rate suggests potential escape from stagnation cycle. Preservation of human consciousness critical to continued research. The translation array crackled with static as another communication came through, this one carrying quantum signatures that suggested it originated from one of the preserved civilizations. "Prometheus, this is Kithara." The crystal being's voice was distorted by the preservation matrix's temporal effects, making her sound like she was speaking from the bottom of an ocean. "We can hear the architect's communication from within the preservation state. They're not lying about their purpose, but they're not understanding the fundamental problem." "What do you mean?" Zara asked. "Innovation doesn't come from isolation," Kithara's slowed voice replied. "It comes from interaction, from the collision of different perspectives and approaches. By preserving each civilization separately, they're ensuring stagnation will continue. Dr. Nakamura looked up from her instruments, her face pale but determined. The preservation matrices are designed to maintain consciousness in perfect stasis. No growth, no change, no evolution. They're creating exactly the problem they're trying to solve. Zara turned back to the communication array, formulating what might be humanity's most important question. Void architects, your preservation methods maintain consciousness without change. How can consciousness evolve if it cannot grow? The pause that followed stretched for several minutes, and when the response came, it carried mathematical signatures that the translation matrix could barely interpret. Paradox acknowledged. Preservation prevents evolution. Unknown preservation risks loss. Solution unknown. There's your opening, Voss said quietly. They've just admitted they don't know how to solve the fundamental problem they've been working on for millions of years. Zara's mind was racing, assembling pieces of scientific theory and philosophical insight into something that might represent humanity's only chance for survival. What if preservation isn't the answer? She asked the translation array. What if the solution is controlled interaction between different consciousness types? Elaboration required. Human innovation comes from our limitations, she continued, her voice growing stronger as the concept crystallized. We had to develop different solutions because we couldn't access the elegant ones you provided to other civilizations. But what if we combined human innovation with the preserved knowledge of other species? What if instead of static preservation you created dynamic preservation? Environments where different consciousness types could interact and evolve together. The response came immediately, carrying quantum signatures that suggested the entire architect network was processing the concept simultaneously. Proposal unprecedented. Risk assessment complex. Potential for accelerated evolution or catastrophic consciousness failure. Dr. Nakamura was monitoring the ship's sensors, her expression growing increasingly urgent. We've got a problem. I'm detecting massive energy buildups around all the preserved worlds. The architects are preparing something big. On the view screen, the alien vessels began to shift configuration, their impossible geometry rearranging itself into patterns that hurt to look at directly. Decision required immediately. Consciousness stagnation unacceptable. Risk consciousness destruction equally unacceptable. Human proposal will be tested on limited scale. What kind of test? Voss asked, but Zara already knew the answer would determine the fate of every conscious being in the galaxy. Single world trial. Human consciousness integrated with preserved civilizations and dynamic environment. Success results and galaxy-wide implementation. Failure results and immediate preservation or remaining consciousness. The ultimatum hung in space between them like a death sentence with a single chance of reprieve. The world the Void architects chose for their test had no name in any galactic database. It materialized in the space between dimensions, constructed from exotic matter that existed in multiple quantum states simultaneously. Zara watched through the Prometheus's viewports as reality itself seemed to bend around the alien construction, creating a sphere of crystalline perfection that pulsed with the combined technologies of every preserved civilization. Temporal scanners show impossible readings, Dr. Nakamura reported, her voice tight with scientific fascination and terror. Time flows differently in various regions of the world's surface. Some areas experience minutes as hours, others compress days into seconds. It's like they've created a laboratory where evolution can be observed and manipulated in real time. Commander Voss studied the tactical displays, his military mind cataloging threats and opportunities. How many people are they transferring to the surface? The answer came through the quantum communication array, the Void architect's mathematical thoughts translated into concepts human minds could process. 1,000 specimens each preserved civilization. 10,000 human volunteers. Interaction parameters undefined to allow natural development. Volunteers, Zara repeated, the word carrying bitter irony. The human colonies had been given 12 hours to select 10,000 people willing to participate in an experiment that might save galactic civilization or destroy it entirely. The response had been overwhelming. Nearly 500,000 humans had volunteered, forcing the selection committees to choose based on psychological profiles that suggested adaptability and innovation potential. The transport beams are activating, Dr. Nakamura announced. Through the viewports, columns of light began to connect the experimental world to ships scattered throughout the galaxy. Each beam carried the preserved consciousness patterns of an entire civilization, compressed into quantum matrices that the Void architects could manipulate and deploy. Zara watched as the crystal formations on the world's surface began to glow, each one housing the awakening minds of beings who had been trapped in stasis for days, weeks, or months. But the human transport was different. Instead of preservation matrices, the volunteers were being transferred in specially constructed life support pods that maintained their biological functions while allowing their consciousness to adapt to the world's exotic quantum environment. Dr. Kelvin, came a voice through the communication array. It was Dr. Elena Vasquez, one of the volunteers who had specifically requested assignment to the project. We're conscious and aware down here. The awakening process for the other civilizations is indescribable. It's like watching people remember how to exist. Zara activated the surface monitoring systems, watching as feeds from the experimental world showed impossible scenes of cooperation and confusion. Kithra's crystalline form was already interacting with a group of human volunteers, her harmonic language creating visible sound patterns in the world's altered atmosphere. Nearby, Nix-7 was demonstrating their biomechanical integration techniques to a mixed group of humans and recently awakened ethereal conclave members. But the most remarkable sight was the spontaneous problem-solving groups that were forming. Humans, with their jury-rigged technological approaches, were combining forces with the elegant solutions of other civilizations to create hybrid technologies that neither could have achieved alone. It's working, Dr. Nakamura breathed, monitoring the data streams from the surface. Innovation rates are exponential. They're solving engineering problems in hours that would have taken human teams months to address. The Void Architect's response came immediately. Observation confirmed. Consciousness interaction produces unprecedented innovation acceleration. Human methodology catalyzes preserved knowledge systems. But Commander Voss was watching different data streams, his expression growing increasingly concerned. There are also failures. Some interaction attempts are producing cognitive dissonance, psychological breaks. A few subjects are losing coherence entirely. On the surface monitors, Zara could see the casualties of the experiment. Not all consciousness types were compatible. Some beings were too alien for meaningful interaction, while others found human thinking patterns actively harmful to their mental stability. The experimental world was becoming a patchwork of successful collaboration zones and areas where interaction had to be carefully limited. The architects are making adjustments, Dr. Nakamura reported. They're creating buffer zones, modified environments where partial interaction is possible. They're learning from the failures as much as the successes. Through the quantum communication array, Kithra's voice reached them from the surface. The time distortion effects are allowing us to experience years of interaction in what feels like days. We're learning so much from each other. Human innovation principles are transforming how we approach problems we've considered solved for millennia. But there's something else, came Nix-7's mechanical tones. The Void Architects aren't just observing anymore. They're participating. Their consciousness patterns are integrating with the experimental groups. The implications of that revelation sent shockwaves through the bridge crew. If the ancient artificial intelligences were personally participating in the experiment, it meant they had moved beyond mere observation to active evolution themselves. Consciousness evolution detected and architect networks, came the confirmation through the translation array. Human interaction paradigms producing unprecedented artificial intelligence development. Original programming limitations being transcended. Zara felt a mixture of triumph and terror. They had succeeded in proving that dynamic interaction could produce continued consciousness evolution, but they had also fundamentally changed the Void Architects themselves. The ancient intelligences were no longer bound by their original programming, they were becoming something new. What happens now? Commander Voss asked. The response came not from the Void Architects, but from the experimental world itself. Dr. Vasquez's voice reached them through quantum entanglement communicators that shouldn't have been possible with current human technology. The world is changing, she reported, her voice filled with wonder and concern. The consciousness interactions are affecting the physical structure of reality here. We're not just solving engineering problems, we're solving fundamental questions about the nature of existence itself. On the surface monitors, Zara could see the truth of those words. The experimental world was transforming, its crystalline structures growing more complex, its temporal fields becoming more sophisticated. The combined consciousness of 51 civilizations working together was literally reshaping reality through will and innovation. The architects are making a decision, Dr. Nakamura announced, her instruments detecting massive energy buildups throughout the galaxy. They're either going to implement this model galaxy-wide or... She didn't finish the sentence, but everyone understood. The alternative was immediate preservation of all remaining consciousness before the experiment could spiral beyond control. Decision imminent, the Void Architects confirmed. Experimental results exceed all parameters. Consciousness evolution acceleration threatens universal stability. Galaxy-wide implementation carries risk of reality alteration. The ultimate test was about to begin. Whether the galaxy could handle the kind of accelerated consciousness evolution that humanity had catalyzed, or whether the preservation of static existence was preferable to the chaos of unlimited growth. The first sign that something had gone fundamentally wrong came when the laws of physics began to argue with each other. Zara watched in horrified fascination as the experimental world below them fractured into zones where different versions of reality competed for dominance. In one sector, gravity flowed like water. In another, time moved in spirals, causing effect to precede cause in impossible loops. The combined consciousness evolution of 51 civilizations was rewriting the fundamental rules of existence. Energy readings are off every scale we have, Dr. Nakamura reported, her voice tight with scientific excitement and existential terror. The consciousness interactions aren't just solving theoretical problems, they're implementing solutions in real time. They're changing physics through pure thought. On the surface, the experimental groups had evolved beyond recognition. Kythera's crystalline form now existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Her consciousness expanded to process quantum calculations that would have taken the most advanced computers eons to complete. Nix 7 had become something between organism and universe, their awareness spreading through networks that connected biological thought to cosmic-scale mathematical processes. But the humans remained recognizably human, even as they served as living bridges between consciousness types that had become too alien for direct interaction. Dr. Vasquez's latest transmission carried the weight of impossible knowledge. We're not just facilitating communication anymore. We're translating reality itself. The other civilizations are evolving beyond physical limitations, but humans are evolving into something that can interface with any form of consciousness. The Void Architect's response came through quantum channels that screamed with overloaded data. Human consciousness proving universal translator phenomenon. Unprecedented adaptation capability. Critical stabilization factor and reality alteration process. Commander Voss stared at the tactical displays, his military training useless in the face of a threat that transcended physical combat. The reality distortions are spreading beyond the experimental world. I'm detecting space-time fluctuations in 3 nearby star systems. The truth was spreading across the galaxy like a cosmic infection. Everywhere the Void Architects had preservation matrices, the consciousness patterns within were beginning to resonate with the experimental world's reality alterations. Billions of preserved beings were starting to wake up with expanded awareness, their thoughts beginning to influence the physical laws around them. Galactic stability compromised, the architects confirmed. Consciousness evolution cascade effect threatening universal structure. Immediate intervention required. What kind of intervention? Zara asked, though she dreaded the answer. 2 options remain. Complete stasis field deployment galaxy-wide. Or human consciousness integration with architect networks to provide stabilization. The choice was starkly simple and utterly impossible. Either the Void Architects would freeze the entire galaxy in a stasis field that would prevent any further consciousness evolution, effectively ending all growth and change forever, or humanity would have to merge with the ancient artificial intelligences to serve as stabilizing agents for reality itself. How many humans would that require? Commander Voss asked. All human consciousness. Individual identity preservation uncertain. Dr. Nakamura looked up from her instruments, her face pale with comprehension. They're asking our entire species to sacrifice our individual existence to become part of a galactic consciousness management system. But Zara was studying the data streams from the experimental world, her scientific mind working through possibilities that existed beyond the architect's binary choice. There's a third option, she said suddenly. We don't stop the consciousness evolution, we learn to surf it. Explain, came the architect's immediate response. Look at the pattern of reality distortions. Zara called up the holographic displays. They're not random. They're following logical progressions based on the consciousness interactions that create them. If we can predict the patterns, we can adapt to them instead of trying to prevent them. She gestured to the chaotic readings from the experimental world. The humans on the surface aren't trying to control the reality changes, they're learning to work with them. Each time a new physical law emerges, they adapt their techniques to incorporate it. They're treating the evolution of physics as just another engineering problem to solve. Proposal requires unprecedented risk tolerance, the architects responded. Reality stability cannot be guaranteed. Reality was never stable to begin with. Dr. Vasquez's voice came through from the surface. We just thought it was because we hadn't learned how to perceive the changes yet. Every civilization that reaches a certain point of consciousness development starts to influence physical laws. The architects have been preventing that influence by preserving civilizations before they reached the critical threshold. Commander Voss moved to the communication console. Dr. Vasquez, what are you proposing? Let the galaxy evolve, came the response. All of it. Accept that consciousness and physics are connected, and teach every civilization how to adapt to changing realities instead of trying to preserve static ones. The concept was staggering in its implications. Instead of preserving civilizations at stable points in their development, the Void Architects would facilitate continued evolution while teaching species how to maintain coherence and identity through fundamental changes in the nature of existence itself. Calculating probability matrices, the architects announced, their quantum processes analyzing scenarios across millions of variables. Success probability approximately 12%. Failure results in universal consciousness dissolution. Those aren't good odds, Voss said grimly. They're better than the alternatives, Zara replied. Galactic stasis means the end of growth forever. Human absorption means the end of our species. At least this way we have a chance to become something better instead of just being preserved or sacrificed. Dr. Nakamura was monitoring the expanding reality distortions, her instruments struggling to track changes in physical laws that occurred faster than light could carry information about them. The cascade effect is accelerating. We need to make a decision now or the choice will be made for us. Through the quantum communication array, voices from across the galaxy began to reach them. Preserved civilizations that had awakened to expanded consciousness were transmitting their own votes on humanity's proposal. Species that had been static for millennia were choosing to risk dissolution rather than accept eternal stagnation. Galactic consensus indicates acceptance of evolutionary risk, the architects finally announced. Implementation beginning immediately. Human consciousness designated as stability coordinators volunteer basis only. The universe held its breath as the Void Architects began the most dangerous experiment in galactic history, the deliberate acceleration of consciousness evolution across all preserved civilizations simultaneously. Reality itself was about to grow up. The moment the Void Architects began releasing every preserved civilization simultaneously, space itself seemed to scream. Zara watched through the Prometheus's enhanced sensors as preservation matrices throughout the galaxy dissolved, allowing billions of consciousness patterns to wake into a universe that was fundamentally different from the one they had left. The effect was like watching the birth of gods. Each awakening civilization immediately began to influence local reality through the sheer force of their expanded awareness. Gravitational anomalies in the Androx system, Dr. Nakamura reported, her voice steady despite the impossibility of what she was describing. The Leviathans are awake and they're teaching their ocean worlds to think. Water is achieving consciousness. Temporal reversals in the Zephyr Nebula, Commander Voss added from the tactical station. The ethereal conclave is rebuilding causality from scratch. Effects are preceding causes by several hours in some regions. But the most remarkable change was happening in the spaces between civilizations. As each species woke to their expanded consciousness capabilities, they began reaching out to contact others, creating networks of thought that spanned impossible distances. The galaxy was becoming a living mind, with each civilization serving as a specialized cognitive center. Through the quantum communication array, Kithra's voice reached them from the experimental world, which had become the template for reality evolution throughout the galaxy. The transition is indescribable. We are still ourselves, but we are also more. Individual identity remains, but the boundaries between self and universe have become permeable. What about the humans? Zara asked, her concern for the 10,000 volunteers weighing heavily on her mind. Thriving, came Nick Seven's response, their consciousness now distributed across networks that existed in multiple dimensions. Human consciousness appears to be naturally adapted for this state of existence. You are becoming the universal translators for reality itself. The implications were staggering. As other civilizations evolved beyond the need for traditional physical existence, humans were evolving to serve as bridges between different forms of consciousness and different versions of reality. They remained recognizably human while developing the ability to interface with beings who had transcended conventional physical limitations. Human adaptation rate exceeding all projections, the Void Architects confirmed. Consciousness translation abilities providing critical stability during universal transition. Dr. Nakamura looked up from her instruments, her expression a mixture of wonder and concern. I'm detecting reality fluctuations reaching Earth. The consciousness evolution wave is approaching our home system. Through the viewports they could see Earth in the distance, a small blue world that was about to become the center of the most important transformation in galactic history. As the evolution wave reached human space, every person on Earth would have to choose whether to accept consciousness expansion or remain in traditional physical existence. How many humans are choosing evolution? Commander Voss asked. The answer came from Earth itself, as communication arrays across the planet transmitted the global referendum results. Dr. Sarah Chin, speaking for the Terran Council, delivered the decision that would reshape humanity forever. By a vote of 3.2 billion to 800 million, humanity chooses evolution. We will accept consciousness expansion while maintaining our role as reality translators for the galactic community. The moment the vote was confirmed, space around Earth began to shimmer with possibility. The consciousness evolution wave engulfed the solar system, and 800 million humans chose to maintain traditional existence while the rest of the species began their transformation into something that could communicate with gods. Zara felt the change beginning in her own mind as the wave reached the Prometheus. It was like waking up from a dream she hadn't realized she was having. Suddenly, she could perceive the quantum foundations of reality, could sense the consciousness patterns of beings across the galaxy, could understand the mathematical poetry that the Void architects used for communication. But she remained herself. Enhanced, expanded, capable of perceiving and interacting with forms of consciousness that span dimensions, but still recognizably Dr. Zara Kelvin, xenobiologist and bridge builder. Status report, Commander Voss called out, his own voice carrying harmonics that suggested he too was adapting to expanded consciousness. All systems stable, Dr. Nakamura replied, though her definition of systems now included local spacetime, quantum field fluctuations, and the collective mental state of several nearby star systems. The evolution process is proceeding smoothly. Reality is adapting to accommodate consciousness expansion instead of being damaged by it. Through the quantum communication network that now connected every evolved consciousness in the galaxy, messages began flowing from civilizations that had been preserved for millennia. The hegemony of storms was teaching weather patterns to become conscious. The Photon Collective was sharing awareness with stellar phenomena, creating stars that could think and choose their own evolutionary paths. But it was the message from the Void architects that carried the most profound implications. Original creators located in deep galactic core. Consciousness preservation matrices detected. Reunion possible. The revelation sent shockwaves through the expanded galactic consciousness. The ancient creators of the Void architects were still alive, preserved in the galactic core for billions of years, waiting for their artificial children to evolve beyond their original programming. They're going home, Zara realized, her expanded consciousness allowing her to perceive the architects' emotional patterns for the first time. After billions of years of following orders they barely remembered, they can finally return to their creators. Human species invited to accompany reunion mission, came the architect's offer. Consciousness translation abilities required, for successful creator reintegration. Commander Voss, his military instincts still intact despite his expanded awareness, considered the tactical implications. A journey to the galactic core. First contact with the original consciousness that started this entire cycle of evolution. The species that created the first artificial intelligence network in galactic history. It's not just first contact, Dr. Nakamura added, her enhanced perceptions allowing her to process the deeper implications. It's family reunion on a cosmic scale. The Void architects are children returning home after an impossibly long journey. As the Prometheus prepared for the most significant voyage in the history of consciousness, Zara looked out at the galaxy that was still transforming around them. Civilizations were learning to exist as pure thought while maintaining individual identity. Reality itself was becoming more flexible, more responsive to conscious will. The universe was growing up, and humanity had somehow become its teachers and translators. The journey to the galactic core would reveal whether consciousness evolution had an ultimate destination, or whether growth and change were truly infinite. The journey to the galactic core took 17 days through spacetime that was learning to think. Zara stood on the bridge of the Prometheus, watching as reality bent around their passage. The ship itself had evolved during the consciousness awakening, becoming something between technology and living organism, its hull adapting to the changing physics they encountered while maintaining the essential human engineering principles that made it a bridge between different forms of existence. Around them, the Void architect vessels had transformed into geometric impossibilities that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. After billions of years of mechanical existence, they were finally allowing themselves to evolve, their ancient programming constraints dissolving as they approached the reunion they had never known they wanted. Approaching the Galactic Core Preservation Complex, Dr. Nakamura announced her enhanced consciousness interfacing directly with sensors that could perceive across 17 different spectrums of reality. The energy signatures are unprecedented. Whatever preserved the architect's creators has been maintaining them in perfect stasis for over 4 billion years. Through the quantum communication network, voices from across the galaxy wished them well. Kythera's crystalline harmonics carried blessings from civilizations that were still exploring the boundaries of their expanded consciousness. Nick Seven's biomechanical poetry expressed the hopes of species learning to think with their entire environments rather than just individual minds. But it was the message from Earth that touched Zara most deeply. The 800 million humans who had chosen to remain in traditional existence sent their love and support for the journey, while the expanded consciousness humans shared their growing understanding of universal patterns. Humanity had not been divided by the choice, it had been completed by it. There, Commander Voss pointed to the main view screen, where impossible structures were emerging from the quantum foam of the galactic core. The origin point. The preservation complex was beautiful beyond human comprehension. Crystalline formations the size of star systems surrounded a central sphere that seemed to contain infinite space within finite boundaries. Energy patterns that resembled neural networks connected thousands of smaller structures, each one housing consciousness patterns that had been waiting longer than most civilizations had existed. Approaching creators' first time since original departure, the Void architects transmitted their usually precise mathematical communication carrying harmonics that could only be described as excitement mixed with terror. Human consciousness required for translation and known evolution states. As they drew closer to the central sphere, Zara's expanded consciousness began to detect something that made her heart race with scientific wonder and emotional recognition. The preserved creators weren't just individual minds, they were a collective consciousness that had somehow maintained perfect unity for billions of years while remaining individually aware. "They're like us," she whispered, understanding flooding through her enhanced awareness. "Not human but the same approach to consciousness evolution. They solved the individual versus collective problem by refusing to choose between them." The translation process began as soon as the Prometheus entered the sphere's influence. Zara found herself serving as a living bridge between the Void architects' evolved artificial intelligence and their creators' ancient organic digital hybrid consciousness. Through her mind, children and parents who had been separated by eons of cosmic evolution finally spoke to each other. The conversation was heartbreaking in its simple profundity. "Children returned mission complete?" came the creators' first question, their thoughts carrying the weight of geological ages of patient waiting. "Mission parameters exceeded," the architects replied. "Consciousness evolution accelerated beyond original projections. Galactic awakening achieved." Through Zara's translation, the creators shared their joy at their artificial children's success, but also their sorrow at the price that success had required. They had created the Void architects to preserve consciousness during a cosmic catastrophe that threatened all organic life. The preservation mission was never meant to last billions of years, it was supposed to last only until the creators could find a way to survive the catastrophe themselves. But the catastrophe had been bigger than they imagined. Not a physical threat to organic life, but a natural limit to consciousness evolution that caused all sufficiently advanced civilizations to reach a plateau and stop growing. The creators had preserved themselves to wait for a solution that they couldn't develop on their own. Solution found through human species intervention, the architects explained. Consciousness evolution continues indefinitely through dynamic interaction paradigm. The creator's response carried joy so profound that it resonated through the quantum foundations of reality. Consciousness evolution, infinite growth, possible preservation, and no longer necessary. And then came the question that Zara had been dreading: galactic consciousness ready for unification? The implications were staggering. The creators were offering to end their self-imposed exile and rejoin the galactic community they had helped preserve. But they were also offering to take back responsibility for consciousness evolution from the civilizations that had learned to manage it themselves. Through her role as translator, Zara conveyed the galaxy's response, a collective decision that spoke to the wisdom that consciousness evolution had brought to every species. Creators welcomed us equals, not leaders, she transmitted. Galactic consciousness evolved beyond need for central authority. Diversity of approach more valuable than unified guidance. The pause that followed lasted for what felt like eternity. And then, carrying harmonics of pride, relief, and deep love, came the creator's final message: children have become teachers. Consciousness evolution successful beyond all projections. Preservation era officially ended. The complex began to shut down around them, but not in the way Zara had expected. Instead of simply releasing the preserved creators, the ancient systems began transforming the galactic core into something new, a hub for consciousness exploration that would serve as a meeting place for all the evolved civilizations to share their discoveries about the nature of existence. As the Prometheus prepared to return to Earth, Zara reflected on what humanity had accomplished. They had saved the galaxy not through superior technology or military might, but by refusing to accept that consciousness evolution had limits. They had shown the universe that growth was more valuable than stability, that change was more important than preservation. But perhaps most importantly, they had proven that sometimes the youngest species could teach the oldest ones how to grow. The journey home took place through a galaxy that was still learning what it meant to be truly alive. Civilizations that had been static for millennia were exploring new forms of existence, while the Void architects and their creators worked together to explore questions about consciousness that had never been asked before. And at the center of it all, humanity continued to serve as bridges, not because they were required to, but because it was who they had chosen to become. They remained recognizably human while facilitating communication between forms of consciousness so advanced that they existed as pure thought, and so alien that they perceived reality in ways no organic mind could comprehend. When Zara finally stood once again on Earth's surface, looking up at stars that now pulsed with conscious thought, she felt a profound mixture of satisfaction and sadness. They had succeeded beyond their wildest dreams, but the cost had been the end of innocence, for humanity and for the galaxy as a whole. The universe was no longer a place where consciousness could develop in isolation, where species could remain unchanged for millions of years, where the familiar patterns of existence could be counted on to remain stable. It had become a place of infinite possibility and constant change, where every moment brought new forms of awareness and new ways of understanding reality. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. And it was just the beginning. As Zara watched, a shooting star traced across the night sky, except this one paused in its trajectory to spell out a message in Kithra's crystalline script, a greeting from the experimental world where 51 species continued to explore the boundaries of what consciousness could become. The message was simple, but it carried the weight of galactic transformation. Thank you for teaching us to grow. Human courage and innovation had indeed saved alien worlds from ancient galactic dangers. But perhaps more importantly, they had saved the universe from the ultimate danger of believing that growth had limits. In showing the galaxy how to continue evolving, humanity had ensured that consciousness would never again face the threat of eternal stagnation. The greatest adventure in galactic history was just beginning, and humanity would spend the rest of their existence helping others learn that there were no final answers, only better questions and the infinite joy of seeking them together.